Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to MindShifters Radio with your co-host, the Forgiveness Doctor, Dr. Michael Ryce, and his wife, Jeanie. Michael and Jeanie share with you the wisdom of the ancient Aramaic internal process of forgiveness. They offer tools and support 5 days a week from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. They will support you in building a solid foundation within yourself to live in pure love. In Aramaic, Rakhma. Michael is the author of Why Is This Happening to Me Again? For more information on Michael and Jeanie, please visit www.whyagain.com. And now your co-host, the Forgiveness Doctor, Dr. Michael and Jeanie Ryce.
And the truth that is rooted within me.
Hi, and welcome to MindShifters Radio with the Forgiveness Doctor, Dr. Michael Ryce. Our call-in number is 646-200-4169. The call-in number is only going to be available for the first part of the show, so if you have a question, please call in. And hello, Michael.
Hi, sweetie. And as Jeanie said, the call-in number is only going to be available for the first part of the show. We're on the road. I'm in Bristol, Tennessee, and Jeannie's in Kingsport, Tennessee, and she's only going to be here doing the switchboard for the first part of the show. So if you have a question, now would be a good time to call in with it. We would be delighted to hear from you, 646-200-4169. Jeannie will be leading the show in a little while, and she has the button for the call-in. So if you have a thought for us, please share it. And do we have any callers on the line, Jeanie, or any?
David is on right now, and we've got a few people in the chat room. They're just listening.
Okay. Have we seen Dr. Tim yet?
Not yet.
Oh, okay. Well, today I had thought, David, how do you be, sir?
I'm doing fine, Michael. Thank you very much. Doing very well.
And do you have anything in mind for today? Anything exciting happening at Heartland? For those who don't know David is the manager at Heartland and is there holding the fort while we're on the road, bringing this message around the globe, and he's there backing us up, supporting us, and getting it out there. Jeanie, did you start to say something, sweetie?
No, I didn't say anything.
It's probably me. I was just responding to your thoughts or to your question, and nothing really is on my mind about talking about, with the exception of getting to begin in about 11 days now, and I was thinking of the talk show and the different classes and it's going to be going on. And just the value that the people are going to receive and be part of being here. It's always so incredible to one, get ready for it. It's a big challenge, and then, like everything else, getting ready for it's always the preparation and the work going into preparing for something, and then the value that's received from it, and I'm kind of even referring to the work that you're teaching and the invitation that's being made to folks about asking questions, because that's where the real work lies, is in the action and taking some different actions so that we can create some different results.
For sure.
One of the expressions that I like is, I can't do something I don't know if I keep doing what it is that I do know. There's just no insight, just kind of an intellectual insight. That's really great. And an experiential, a real knowing of it comes through putting the work into action with it. So I just encourage people to question the different things that it's bringing up around this particular work and to participate
Cool.
in the show.
Sure, and point, and you go back 2,000 years ago, and the man named Yeshua says, in order to understand his work, you had to have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. And many times he says, if only you had the eyes to see and the ears to hear. There are so many things I want to say to you, but you can't hear them yet. And what he's saying is that we've got to have the brain cells. And we can't function out of brain cells we don't have. Now, of course, everybody has the brain cells for the words, I love you. And we think that means it's something I do to you. And I would offer that I love you is an impossibility. You can be love. If you want a definition of love, hold a newborn. You know exactly what love is. And what we're looking to do is to support every human being on planet Earth to actually claiming their human lives back. And you notice the word is human being. It's about being. It's not about doing. And so the non-being mind always wants to do love. Well, and it wants to find love. And the kids had a song a few years ago, looking for love in all the wrong places. If you think somebody else is going to love you, good luck. It's never going to happen. Well, what do you mean, Michael? It's never going to happen. It's my wife, my parents, what they love me. Well, I'd offer that's not true. If they're functioning in what we might call a loving way, they're functioning out of their being, their true being, love. If you experience your true being, then you have a direct experience of love. And so the idea, as David's talking about, of putting the pen to the paper and doing the work is to not only build the brain cells, but to actually have it in action, to actually put it into your structure in a way that you can function out of it, because you can't function out of an experience you don't have in your structure. And that was spoken of very clearly when they asked a man named Yeshua, what's the first law? And he says, you must have love. You must have a human life, a condition of a human life, when you think of the Creator, when you think of neighbor, when you think of self. And upon this, he says, hangs the law and all its prophets. In other words, if you go read the law and the prophets and you're in a state of hostility or fear, you'll see lots of reasons to be hostile or fearful, and it will be impossible to function out of the brain cells for love. The man named Yeshua is trying to give us an experience, not a story, not a belief system, but something to be living. And so we're here to support you in living as love. And the thought I had for today's show to start out, we did the Beatitudes the last couple of days, but the thought I had was, think about, if you would, any situation where you had difficulty seeing something loving in that situation, where there was some form of hostility or fear for you. And notice that you looked at someone and you saw them through what a guy named Paul a couple of thousand years ago said, we see as though through a glass darkly. You saw them through your own either hostility or fear. When you recognize that that's what's happening, then the requirement is to go back to your original nature, love. And so think about that situation where you had something to criticize about someone, something to condemn about someone, something to, complain about, to be resentful about, whatever it is. Think about that, and then step back from your own mind. And what would it look like to see that exact same situation through the eyes of love, through an actual human life? Again, define a human life, hold a newborn. That's love. That's a human life. That's what we're designed to see through. So what would this situation look like through the eyes of love? And I have an experience that a young woman shared with me a couple of years ago. Actually, it's back several years now. But I had a place I spoke at in Atlanta quite often. And I had happened to have been there 2 years in a row. And the second year that I was there in this particular series, a young woman came up to me and said, Michael, I want to thank you for saving my life. My response was, well, I just got in late last night. It wasn't me. He said, well, let me share with you what happened. And the year before, she had done the full series of workshops that I do. And one of the things she'll oftentimes hear me speak about is the brain cells for it and the experience of conscious, active, present love. And she shared that several times since that last series of workshops that she would hear my voice in her head saying the words, conscious, active, present love. conscious, active, present love. And then her story about her life being saved by that was that she had gotten home from work one afternoon and gone into her apartment, locked the door from the inside, and found herself locked in her apartment with a man who had a knife and said he was going to rape her and kill her. Terrified, of course. And as he held the knife to her throat, stripped her clothes off, all the while explaining graphically how he was going to kill her, he began to rape her. She said that she heard, and I just asked the question, is everybody breathing? If this brings something up, breathe and let it loose. So she said she, all of a sudden, as she's in the act of being raped with a knife to her throat, knowing she's going to die, she hears my voice in her head say the words conscious, active, present love. And she said like it threw a switch in her. Something shifted. Something changed. And as it did, she went to another state. And I would offer the state she went to was that of a human life, observing this event through her human beingness rather than through the terrors and fears in her body's mind. And here's the practical application of the tool. So as she shifted, she said, and her words were, I looked in his face and I could see the stark, raving terror in his eyes. And she said, as instantly as I was able to see that, I shifted into total compassion for him. She said it didn't matter at that moment, through the eyes of love, it didn't matter at that moment that I was going to die. She said, I just looked at him with eyes of compassion. And at that moment, she said, as soon as I looked him in the face with that state of compassion, he began to cry. He dropped his knife, got up off of her, and ran out of her apartment. Looking through the eyes of love saved her life. Now, we live in a culture that teaches us all kinds of hostilities and fears, and to look through the eyes of hostility and fear at whatever's going on in our lives. My offering to you, if that's a habit that has been given to you by your family system, and certainly it's passed out by the culture at every turn, if that's an habit, then my invitation to you is to start to consider the situation where you had a complaint or a resentment. Would it have looked different if it were looked at through the eyes of love rather than through the eyes of hostility and fear? Now, our culture kind of has an analogy for that, and it says, you look at the half-full glass, or is it a half-empty glass? Is it half full or half-empty? The person who looks at it through hostility and fear looks at a half-empty life. They see what is undone, what has never been done, what should have been done, what could have been done, and if only they'd have been the right kind of person, if only they'd have been, then it would have been okay. And I'd offer the person who looks at the half-empty glass, the person who looks through hostility and fear, irritation and resentment, is looking through filters in their own minds. And if one were to look at that half-done thing, would one see what an awesome half-full glass there is and the opportunity for a starving person to drink of that instead of the half-empty, the undone, and what's wrong with the situation? If we're looking, we're in disturbance, and our conversation's all about them, our disturbance goes unhealed and lives another day in us until we find somebody else who didn't do it right, somebody else who didn't do it the way we would have done it, somebody else who didn't do it the way we wanted it done, somebody else who didn't do what they should have done, and leave unacknowledged what they did do. And what that means is that you had a power person that looked at you through the eyes of what you should have done, could have done, ought to have done, and if you only had, and if you'd done it like I said, then you would be okay. And we tend to pass on that dynamic from our power person. If you're not familiar with the power person issue that we're talking about, you can go back to about 6 weeks or so ago in the archives. You'll see where we started a codependence series. Listen through that series. The MP3s are there. Jeanie, any questions or thought in the chat room or phone calls?
There's no phone calls, and Tim's not on yet, and there's several guests in the chat room and a couple of other people who have been out there before, and they're all just listening. Nobody's asking any questions. If anybody is going to call in, I've got about 10 minutes, and then I'm off the show, so if after that we won't be able to turn your call on, so please call in. 646-200-4169.
So if you would do that, and or, usually Dr. Tim is on, and if Jeanie has to be off of the show or doesn't have phone access, he will relay to us questions or thoughts in the chat room. Is Sam there? Maybe Sam's out there. If you're on, Sam, or if you're in the chat room, perhaps
She's not.
Could. No, okay. Well, if there's anybody there that would be willing, that's in the chat room and has access to call in about 10 minutes when Jeanie's ready to go, she'll give us a couple of minutes' notice. If you could call in, and seeing as how I don't have access to the chat room at this moment, if you could relay if there are any questions, that would be really helpful. Of course, there won't be any more callers come in because Jeanie has the switchboard and will be operating, but she'll be shutting it down. The chat room will be left open. And if you have any, if someone would be willing to call in and just kind of be a relay person, I know that David can't do it because his phone creates an interference pattern, or vice versa, and so it's kind of hard to be in the chat room and on the phone at the same time. But in any event, if somebody would be willing to call in about 10 minutes, just before Jeanie leaves, 646-200-4169, and would be willing to relay any messages in the chat room, questions, that would be awesome. Other than that, any thoughts from anybody on looking through the eyes of love? What would we see if we were to be looking through those eyes rather than the eyes of hostility or fear? And, this body-mind unit that we have, we call it a body-mind unit. Its actual function that we call mind isn't really mind at all. And we call it the replicate mind because all it can do is replicate whatever's in it. It can't do anything else but play out what's there. But in past ages, the wisdom keepers of all those ages have attempted to show the mass of people how to wrest power away from the replicate mind and how to wake up. And it's been spoken in virtually every culture, every language, every religion that's ever existed in the world. And, of course, many times what unfortunately happened was those who had no experience other than what the replicate mind would show them looked at these teachings and said, this looks pretty good. I can gather some power here. And it starts to interpret through its fear-based, its half-empty glass. And, if you listen to the man named Yeshua, he says, I come to bring you life and bring it more abundantly. You'll notice he doesn't say, I come to threaten you with something other than abundant life. I come to bring you that. I come to wash you in the love of God. You are born of love. You live in an energy field that lives, moves, and has its being in a sea of energy called love. And when we allow ourselves to be flooded with that washing clears away the hostilities, the fears, the grief, the pain, the trauma. If you can't imagine that, read the wisdom keepers of all ages. That's what they've written about. And the most powerful ones oftentimes are the ones who've been through the major traumas, the biggest traumas of all. Why? Because they had the experience of the dark side. And they had the experience of the light side. And they attempted to shift people. They attempted to convert people. And conversion doesn't mean bringing somebody into your religion. Conversion means shifting people from a mind based in hostility or fear back to what we're designed to work with, and that is a love-based mind. So we're
Michael?
here to support you. Yes, sweetie?
I have Deb on the line. It's from San Diego, area code 619. You're on the air.
Hi, Michael.
Hello, 619. Give us a name.
I'm on my cell phone, and I'm hoping that you can hear me.
I hear you loud and clear. Who am I speaking with?
This is Bev in San Diego.
Oh, hey, welcome. Glad to hear from you again.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
All
so
right.
I have a question.
Yes.
How do people stay out of fear when it comes to illnesses?
Okay, good question. How do you stay out of fear when it comes to illnesses? Well, that actually fits right in with a question that Richard in my book asks when he faces somebody who's doing a fear trip on him, and he says, "Well, how could you be in a space of love when somebody does something terrible to you?" And of course, the disease process looks the same way. And the answer that I gave to Richard in the book is, well, Richard, the person who can be love when faced with someone who's doing something abusive is a person who has no form of hostility or fear in them. And so the answer would be identical. If there's hostility or fear in your structure, then what will tend to happen is the replicant mind will go, see, now we have a reason to fear. There is never a reason to fear. Fear is the thing that produces the result that is feared. You go back and several thousand years ago, Job gave us the key to that when he says, that which I feared most has come upon me. Fear is an amplifier for a frequency, and if one has fear about a disease, then the disease is not fear, is not whatever they've labeled it. It's the ABC disease. I would offer their disease is fear. And fear creates distortions in the tissue structure that looks like cellular anomaly that we say, oh, well, we can identify this because this is the ABC disease. And, if someone's in anger about their disease, guess what? Their disease isn't the ABC disease or the XYZ disease. Their disease is anger. And when we start addressing those things and removing them, what we'll find oftentimes is that the tissue structure goes back to a state of health, because it is what we introduce into the tissue that creates the distortion that looks like physical disease. And it really isn't physical disease because there's no physical. When we talk about physical, if we listen to Einstein says this, on such things as matter we have been all wrong. What we have heretofore called matter is energy. Energy whose vibrations have been so lowered as to be perceptible to the senses. There is no matter. And so we don't have a material body. Our mind makes it look like a material thing, but it's really an organized state of energy. Everything else is an appearance. In fact, I was listening to an interview with David Bohm, a physicist, and he was talking about, how they got down to the atomic structure, and it's interesting. His words were exactly the same as Yeshua 2,000 years ago. Yeshua said, don't judge by appearances. And Bohm says, we got down to the atomic structure and we figured, finally we figured out what the universe is about. And then he went, and then we found out that there were still smaller particles, so the atom was just an appearance. It was mostly space. So he says, and then we got down to the next level of particles and we went, we finally figured it out. And then he said, and then there are smaller particles, and those smaller particles are just another appearance. We introduce rage, grief, hostility, deep-seated hatred, vengeance into our tissue structure. Wherever we put those frequencies, we distort the tissue. So I would say, rather than how not to fear, because, of course, if we're looking not to fear, then we're going to generate fear, would be how to heal fear, how to heal rage, guilt, grief, etc. And as you remove those things, what tends to happen is the tissue goes back to a healthy condition.
Wow, that's fantastic. Yep. So do worksheets is the answer.
There you go. The opening words in the book of John, we're told the opening words in John say, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word became flesh. But in Aramaic, what it says is, in the beginning was the mind energy, and the mind energy became flesh. Cell biologist Bruce Lipton, one of the DVDs we carry on our website is Mind, Body, Bioenergetics. There's a 1-hour interview with myself on a television station in New York talking about this principle, and there's a 1-hour interview with Bruce Lipton, the cell biologist. What Bruce is showing in the laboratory is that when you think a thought, you produce a molecule called a neuropeptide. The neuropeptide circulates around in your structure until you find a cell with a receptor site that matches. That neuropeptide, that thought, literally, the energetic pattern of that thought, lands on the cell. The cell replicates it chemically, and now you're living with the chemistry of your thought. Every time you put a thought unlike human life into your cellular structure, you create the appearance of a chemical that is an anomaly in that cell, and we say, well, this cell's disease is because of this chemical. But the chemical is just another appearance, as Bohm says. It's all to do with what we do with our minds. That's why in the ancient teachings they said, be transformed by the renewal of your mind. They talked about repentance, and, the replicate mind, the fear-based mind does repentance, and look at the terrible thing you've done, and, you just have to claim yourself a sinner, and then, but if you look at the word repent, it comes from repenser, which means to rethink, and it speaks of turning another direction, turning from what's already stored in the structure, turning toward the active presence of love, a human life, embodying a human life, and flushing out, washing out everything that never belonged in your bloodline, in your culture, or your own tissue structure.
I'm taking notes as you're talking. Yeah, it does. I'm taking notes as you're talking.
Awesome. Cool. There are a couple of DVDs you might want to look at in that regard if you want to take that topic further. One of them is the Mind-Body Bioenergetics, and also On Creating Consciously. We get into that principle, and there's a whole series of things that are said in the ancient teachings about how it is that we create our lives. Like, for instance, you can reduce the whole body of the law to 3 words out of those teachings, or at least that's what Yeshua did 2,000 years ago. And it just tells you how the whole thing works, and it's it's the essence and the embodiment of the whole law. And it's so simple that not even a Philadelphia lawyer could misinterpret it. The replicate mind could, but a Philadelphia lawyer couldn't even misinterpret it. And he says, here's how it works: 3 words: ask and receive. That means if it's showing up in your physiology or your life, somewhere, somehow, you're asking for it. Now, forgiveness is, how do you undo your asking? How do you remove what never belonged? And that's why the focus of our work is forgiveness. So
that's a great answer. So how do you recommend using the worksheets?
Well, if there were a disease process going on, there are several different topics that you could do. In the worksheet, number 1 is, what's the object of attention? What are we focusing on in this state of disturbance that we have, that we call a disease? So if my focus is, let's say, the diagnosis that I got, then in number 1A, I'd put diagnosis. 1B, I was told I have the ABC disease. How do I feel? Helpless. What's my thought? Well, this is hopeless. There's nothing I can do about it. What's my goal? Well, I want to be empowered here. I cancel my need to be empowered. Now I just open my empowered file, and I can look at what I hold in the way of mind energy in my file on being empowered that doesn't belong there, and I remove it. That's forgiveness. If I were to, let's say, for instance, maybe the doctor told me I have the ABC disease and I'm angry at the doctor. So the doctor would be, now I say I'm angry at the doctor. I'm never angry at anybody or anything. I'm angry because there's angry in here. So if I'm angry and expressing it toward the doctor, then the doctor would be number 1A. And, he told me I have the ABC disease. What do I feel? I feel angry and rageful toward him. How dare he? What's my thought? Well, he's just given me a death sentence. What do I want? I want to be healthy and at peace. You could do a worksheet on yourself. You could do a worksheet on the body or a body part. There are many different, any object of attention that you could imagine focusing any form of hostility or fear on is what would start to undo and open that part of the structure. And, of course, for those who are new to the conversation about forgiveness, you can go to www.whyagain.com. It's www.whyagain.com. On the right-hand side, there's a link that says Download Worksheets. The first 3 links. First one will give you an explanation. Second one will give you the actual worksheet. Third one will give you a link to an MP3 on a radio show a couple months ago when we walk the young lady named Pamela through the worksheet step by step. So you've got total instructions in writing and spoken. And it's an awesome tool.
Where was the spoken one?
The third link under download worksheets. The first link is a new chapter 24 from my book, Why Is This Happening to Me Again? So you can click on that and download. That gives the instruction set for the forgiveness process. And then the second link is the actual 7-step worksheet. The third link is an MP3 of the show where we guided a young lady through the worksheet process.
Oh, that's
and of course,
great.
if you start doing some worksheets and you get stuck anywhere, two things. There are many tools built within that 7-step worksheet. If there's a part that, I don't know how this works, I don't understand it, I can't do this, skip over that one and do the rest of it. And what will happen is it will bring clarity. And or, if anywhere along the way in doing the worksheet, you need some refinement. I don't understand what step 6 it means. I don't understand what step 5 means. Call us. That's why we're here, to answer those questions.
Wow.
And, of course, if you have a question, everybody else has probably got the same question, or many others haven't, so maybe they haven't formulated it yet, but I oftentimes will get when Charlie called, he said this and this and this. It's like, that's exactly what I was trying to figure out how to say. And so it's always a gift if somebody has a question, as your question today is a gift.
Thank you. And then also I'll volunteer to help with whatever you need on the phone with Jeanie leaving.
Awesome.
I don't know if my cell phone will do it, but I'll try.
Oh, no, you're perfect. If you're in the chat room,
I'm not.
Are you in the chat room right now?
No, I haven't registered for that, I realize.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know that you need to actually register to you can read the chat room as a guest if you can tap in. Basically what we need with Jeanie leaving is somebody who can read the chat questions. If somebody comes up with a question and can just relay it to me over the phone, because I can't see the chat room while I'm on the phone.
Well, what it says is to comment on the chat, you must be logged in, and then please register or log in, neither of which I've done.
Well, Jeanie, I don't know the intricacies of that, sweetie.
Okay.
Can you share anything with her about that? Are you there, Jeanie? Oh, maybe she's already gone.
Okay.
Anyway,
well,
I don't think
you need to
fully. I don't think you need to actually fully log in. You can just key in as a guest and go in the chat room. So if that works, fine.
Okay, let me try that.
That's cool too.
Okay, I'll try it right now. Thank you so much, Michael.
Oh, you are so welcome. Are you on our mailing list, by the way?
I actually don't think I am, no.
Oh, well, you might want to drop us an email, and we'll put you on the mailing list. My email is mjr@whyagain.com. Just my initials, mjr. My initials, mjr@whyagain.com. If you drop me that, I'll let you know. And you know that we are starting our intensive season on the 18th. We've got a 9-day Why Is This Happening to Me Again intensive starting in, I think it's 10 or 11 days now. And in that 9-day, we'll cover Why Is This Happening to Me Again, healing through relationships, communication. Did you hear what I think I said? Purpose, personal power, and commitment, empowered to heal, MindShifters, hands-on energy field work, and still point breathing. And we're going to bring some of the codependence works into this one too. So if you are inclined to take your work to the next level, then you might want to look on the site under schedule and look at the dates for Heartland Intensive. We have a teaching center in the Ozarks in southern Missouri, a little town called Theodosia, about 2 hours out of Springfield, Missouri, an hour due east of Branson. And we can accommodate about 60 people for intensives. We're going to have a very small group this year. The last couple of years are actually the smallest intensive seasons we've had in over 20 years of operation. So it's going to be some pretty intense personal attention with the small group that we'll be having. If you're ready to take your work to the next level, then that's what we'll be jumping into starting on the 18th of July. And basically Heartland, food, accommodations, workshop materials, everything's $175 a day. All you need to do is bring your toothbrush and personal type belongings, and everything else is at Heartland. The food, the accommodations, workshop materials, everything is totally included. So a 9-day intensive is $1,575. We also have work support programs, work exchange type programs, anything from a 40-day to a 2-year program that we set up and do. So if anybody's ready to go to the next level, come and play. David, do you have any other thoughts on the conversation around doing worksheets around or fear around diseases?
Well, you know, Michael, I've heard it before, and I've heard you talk about and the language and change the meaning of the words, and even with the word disease, since I've used the word linked to separate it, the hyphen and disease, some people have
real hard to understand, David.
Beg your pardon?
Very hard to understand, David.
Okay. Well, I'll move to another location and see if there was something. Is this any better? Outside?
That sounds better.
Okay.
That's better.
What I was referring to was that the whole the language of that it's a disease, that there's something there's something that's causing it, and just to change the word and pay attention to the word and put the hyphen in there, that it's dis-ease, that there's something that's out of harmony, that it's not at ease, it's not in balance with it. And just even being willing to look at that, and that's quite a challenge for the mind to shift, because the culture is so programmed and society is such that it continues to say, no, it's something that's outside of that. Being at the MindShifters is
why we call this MindShifters Radio.
Right. So being in the environment, as with like coming to an intensive, and or being involved in a MindShifters group and doing the work on a daily basis, is really the only way to that I know, or the best way that I know, in order to make that shift with it. You use an analogy of have you ever moved your furniture around and have a trash receptacle that you normally sit at your desk and you throw the trash, and you move the trash can, or someone else moves the trash can, then all of a sudden, habitually, boom, throwing it where it used to be. And it takes a while in order for the mind to pay attention and to get it to shift in that way. So the same way in looking at that word disease and the disharmony of being out of balance with it. So that's my thoughts.
You there, David?
Hello?
Hello?
Yeah.
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Oh, okay. Yeah,
I'm on? Okay.
All right.
So anyway, that's my thoughts around the disease.
Yes, the lack of ease, created by our own actions, our own ways of thinking and experiencing life. And so to start to move out of this state that David Bohm called sustained incoherence, and that we're stuck in this sustained incoherence in this carbon-based memory system in this body's mind. And as we begin to change that, we step into the real true mind that we were designed to function out of, and that is the presence of a human life. The world specializes in filling us with all kinds of other things. You want life and life more abundantly? Forgive. Remove what doesn't belong. Stop blaming everybody else because your tissue structure's, showing it up. And as you take responsibility and move through that, then everything begins to change. And that's where we're heading.
And that requires a commitment as well.
Oh, yes. Well, yeah, because we're facing 1,000 generations for the most part, a lot of it's really crazy stuff. You know, the beatings, the I was reading recently a book on some of the work of some in the realm of psychology and psychiatry, and Freud's original stuff, where he discovered that there were just like quantum quantities, if you can say such a thing, of sexual abuse in his patients. But working as he was back then, the rest of psychiatry basically convinced him to throw that work away, to put that away. Like, our culture couldn't accept you talking about that. And the numbers of sexually abused children in this society are just outrageously horrendous. So horrendous that Freud disappeared the work that he did in that arena. There's actually an author, this fellow that I've been reading recently, and he's been virtually made an outcast because he's a researcher on Freud's life. I don't agree with a whole lot of what Freud did, but he was a researcher, and in his research he came across these papers of Freud's, and he wrote a book about it, and he's almost become outcast because he's actually bringing forward the truth of what's going on in our culture. And we need to start to recognize the truth of what we've been doing to ourselves and to each other, and start to straighten out the mind energy that creates all the aberrant cellular appearance of chemistry that looks so crazy. You know, they talk about, you know, kids and their hormones running. Well, there's no such thing as a hormone. All there is mind energy in the cell. And if the kid has been programmed with, you know, sex at every turn, and if you have any question about that, just look at the billboards the next time you ride down the street, look at what comes across with virtually every commercial, and that mind energy is what drives that seemingly aberrant behavior that they say, you know, young boys and young women have because of their hormones raging. We need to clean up the mind energy of this culture. It's insane, folks. The hostility, the rage, the fear, the focus on aberrant sexuality is insane. And it's time for us to start to forgive. It's time for us to start to remove those things. And as we remove them, guess what happens? Things start to clear up. Now, David Bohm, as I referred to earlier, here's one of the things he says. He's talking about thought. He's talking about the mind. He says, I say that this system has a fault in it, a systemic fault. It is not a fault here, there, or here. It's a fault throughout the whole system. He says, can you picture that? It's everywhere and nowhere. That system not only includes our thoughts and feelings, but includes the state of the body. So here's a physicist saying, the state of our bodies, i.e. our diseases, are a result of this systemic fault in our thoughts. And then he goes on to say it includes the whole of society. You may say, I see a problem here, so I will bring my thoughts to bear on this problem, but my thought is a part of that system. It has the same fault as the fault I'm trying to look at, or a similar fault. He says thought is constantly creating problems that way and then trying to solve them. But as it tries to solve them, it makes it worse because it doesn't notice it's creating them. And the more it thinks, the more problems it creates. What's the bottom line mean? You got to be out of your mind. What does that mean? It means forgive. When you forgive, you collapse the output of the replicate mind. You collapse the output of the body's mind. You have a chance to go back into your human beingness and the mind of your human beingness rather than the memory bank of 1,000 generations of the replicate mind. And as you collapse consistently, when they said to Yeshua, how many of these collapses are we going to have to do? Is 7 enough? In Aramaic, he said no. He said 77 times 70. You are going to do an infinite quantity of work around every issue you have that shows up as a disease in your body, your emotions, your mind, your bank account, your relationships, until you're finished with that issue, with that frequency. And so forgiveness is about shifting and changing the content the frequencies that are stored within your cellular structure that create disturbances and distortions in the cellular structure. Forgiveness is how you do this. It's how you collapse this evidential mind. Otherwise, what the mind will show you is whatever you think it should be showing you. Another neat piece from David Bohm. He says this: whatever you think appears in consciousness as a show. If you hold a thought, the specialty of your body's mind is to take whatever it has stored in it and make it into pictures. And, of course, if you're in denial about owning what it is you're experiencing, the pictures will all be about somebody else. So you'll see your thought embodied in Uncle Charlie, who you think is the rotten SOB that did this. And, you know, the guy down the block and whoever, whatever you look at. As long as your filters are set for hostility, resentment, or fear, then your mind, with its active hostility, resentment, or fear, will build pictures of people who are hostile and fearful and resentful. And as you collapse those pictures, you get to go to the content, the root of this carbon-based memory system, those things that never belonged in you. And when we talk about the carbon-based memory system, if you haven't been involved in that conversation today, you know, if you ask a physicist what your so-called body is made of, what that physicist will tell you is that the base element of your body is carbon. Carbon, in this form, stores information. In fact, stores every frequency that comes to it, good, bad, or indifferent. So when you recognize the base element of your storage system is carbon, and that whatever's stored into it is passed from generation to generation through the genetics are nothing but these frequencies stored, and they're passed on from generation to generation. And then you look at what the element carbon is, and I offer, my thesis is the Aramaic language was a physics language, a psychological language, an energy systems language, a genetic language. And if you look at the carbon atom that stores these things that are based in hostility and fear and can tear you out of your human life, out of love, guess what the carbon atom structure is? It's 6 electrons, 6 protons, 6 neutrons, 6, 6, 6. What is it that can take you out of love? Only the content of your own carbon-based memory system. What is it that can put you back into love? The collapsing of the projections from that carbon-based memory system. Forgiveness. That's what does it. That's the core tool. And, of course, there are a whole other series of tools around that dynamic of forgiveness that we offer in our workshops. There are 15 different DVDs on the website you can order. And, of course, that's one of the ways that helps us to keep this radio show going and keep our work on the road. If you find yourself benefiting from this work, you might want to jump on the website, www.whyagain.com. On the right-hand side, there's a button for donations. You might want to choose to support us with a donation, to go in there and how has this show benefited you? How has this work benefited you? If it has, help us to take it on and make it available to others, because that's what's at the root of everything we're doing, is moving it forward and taking it on around the globe, every mind, heart, and being on the planet. So, yes, sir.
Michael? Yeah, you and I haven't talked about this yet, and I watched a documentary, a film on the brain, A Secret History. And if anyone's interested, they can go to Top Documentary Films. And it's a fellow by the name of Dr. Michael Mosley that investigates and gives the history behind, some of the history behind psychology and mind control and the emotions, and one of the things is, and what he refers to as the broken brain. And I'm inviting people to watch that so that they can use that as a segue to see what the challenge is what we're up against as a culture and as a society about making the shifts in the minds, because the certain people out there want to keep people in a mind-controlled environment. And this particular documentary goes into how the biggest discoveries came at the Korean War, as you know, Michael, and to get people to fight, and also to do things to where that they could control them. And he doesn't refer to the camps that you've talked about in the Korean War, and it does talk about the mind control, and it shows some pretty horrific experiments that they have done with people, with children, with the in order to control individuals and how to control a population in society. So it's called The Brain, A Secret History, so that it gives people an idea of what the challenge is in making a commitment of what the work is that's involved in order to do it. So,
David, once again, the title of it is The Brain?
It's The Brain, A Secret History. It's by Dr. Michael Mosley. You can go to Top Documentary Films and watch it for free. It's a couple of hours long. It gets into one of the biggest discoveries that I know you're familiar with. He wanted to find out how, this one particular doctor wanted to find out how the Germans and how the people in the concentration camps, how they could behave and do such horrendous things that they would normally do. And it was the research that goes into detail, the research of what they did back in the 50s, which I know you're familiar with, where they had the individuals come in and give a shock to people when they got an incorrect answer. And it goes into detail. There's one person that's still alive that was involved in doing that research, that he was one of the participants that went in and participated in this. And they interviewed him, which was pretty revealing of how it is that they get people to do behaviors that under a normal circumstance they would never, ever do, yet under just a position of authority, within 2/3 of the people were willing to electrocute people in order to, just because that's what they were told to do. It's quite revealing. It's a very, very good documentary. It covers a lot of different things with.
Yeah, and they didn't go quite as far as electrocuting, but giving them some pretty dramatic shocks, at least as far as they knew. That was that particular experiment. And one of the things that we it was enough to kill someone. It's 450 votes that they thought that's what they were giving, which they said was enough in order to that could cause death. Yeah.
They were willing to go with.
And all that the researcher was doing was saying there in the white coat, saying, "Go ahead, it's okay, they're safe, it's all right, you can do it." And it's horrendous how many people would actually administer those levels of shock, and even when they were in the same room with that person, watching them writhe in pain. Of course, the experiment was set up so that the person receiving the shock was actually an actor, but then when they put people in the other room, I forget the numbers now, it's been years since I looked at that research, but 60-70% of people were willing to administer shocks. That this person they can only hear them over a microphone, a sound system, and they're saying, "Oh no, I've got a heart problem. My heart's starting to hurt. Oh, I can't do this. No, don't do this again. Don't." And the research says it's okay. They're okay, and they go ahead and bang, give them the shock. It's amazing. But that ties into we were talking about with the Beatitudes the other day. The Aramaic Beatitudes. One of those Beatitudes speak is of looking into the errors of our society. And if you really want to become successful in your quest for truth, you've got to become aware of and overcome the pitfalls of knowing truth in a society that oftentimes cunningly promotes servitude instead of originality, mass indoctrination instead of education, blaming and being drugged instead of being responsible. And it honors, humdrum commercial skills and unquestioning compliance instead of the thriving existence which originates out of true being, a real, true human life. And we live in a society that says all those other things are the wonderful things that we put on a pedestal, as opposed to being an actual original. You know, they call it education. The word educate comes from the word educare. It means to draw out. It does not mean to put in. Educare, to draw out that true human life that's there, the aliveness, the life more abundant. The society says, no, just do what we tell you to do. Just be a good commercial servant and everything will be okay. So,
you know, Michael,
yes.
Along that same line, because this was something that I noticed about the person that participated in it. Again, it's the only person still alive, of the effect that he's carried for the last 50 years based on doing an act that even though that he later found out that there was no damage within himself, though, because he did that horrific thing, he carried that guilt and blame and so forth along with him. So even though that it may seem like the mind is ignoring it, there's that underlying energy that keeps it locked into that tissue because of the fact that one, that they did it, and one, that they followed instructions from someone else. It's pretty intense with all of it. So
yeah,
maybe
that's
part of what goes on. Go ahead.
Yeah, if you got that at hand, David, maybe just drop an email to Jeanie, and we'll get that put on the website so people can access it and start to move past it, because it's crazy. Much of what our culture is doing, and this whole body of work is designed to present tools which can be used to reestablish ourselves in true being, true aliveness, real high-level wellness. That's something we talk about in the DVD and the CD, actually, of Empowered to Heal, where we go into the Aramaic Beatitudes. But in essence, it's about taking back the management of your responses, your choices, your life, your emotions, your health, your behavior, your mind, your body, your relationships, your food and your drink choices. You know, you live in a culture that spends $50 billion a year to promote, from little kids right from the first time they put their eyes on a television set, $50 billion a year to tell people what to put in their mouths. Food and drink choices. $50 billion. And we think we've got freedom, liberty? Excuse me. This society is so controlled, it's just unbelievable. And it's time for us to wake up and take back control of our lives and live our lives out of alignment with the actual world as it is, rather than the whole myriad of absurd false beliefs we've been brainwashed into accepting about ourselves, about life, and the way the world works. You know, we've been just, it's unbelievable what's happened in our culture. And it's time for us to take back the responsibility for our human lives, responsibility for living active presence of love. And as the active presence of love, living in true total being. It's what you're designed for. It's what I'm designed for. We're not designed to run by rote memory put into us in a classroom by somebody who stood up there in an angry posture telling us we better do what we're told to do or we're going to fail. It doesn't do much for inspiring a true human life. It does a great job for making up commercial servants, for getting people who will go obey all their lives and do what they're told. But is that what life is really about? You know, you think about a squirrel. You know, a squirrel has more liberty than the average human being. Gee, it doesn't have to show its ownership papers to cross the line of the country. We need to wake up, folks. Forgiveness is how you undo what doesn't belong. The reason why so-called forgiveness in our culture has been taught to us as letting other people off the hook is so that we wouldn't know there was a way to remove from our minds what never belonged in our minds. And I would offer that no form of hostility or fear belongs to you as a human being. And when you remove that hostility and fear, you will live the most awesome year yet of your eternal life. Blessings. Bring somebody to the show tomorrow with you.